Good morning and welcome to First Edition, the online ministry of First Community Church. My name is Glenn Miles. I'm the senior minister in this congregation, and I'm thrilled that you've joined us for worship on this day. We want you to know, no matter who you are, no matter where you're from, where you may be going, what you believe or what you don't believe, no matter any of that, you are welcomed and accepted as you are here in this congregation. Right now there's a QR code up on your screen. You can use the camera option on your phone to capture that code. Click on the link, and there you can give for the offering, you can offer a prayer concern, and you can also register your attendance. We would love to hear from you. Please take the time to do it. Today I begin a new sermon series titled Speaking the Truth in Love. It's a line that comes from Paul's letter to the church in Ephesus, where he invites them to speak the truth in love, and then he implores them to grow up into Jesus. It's a fascinating phrase, to grow up into Jesus. In other words, allow Jesus' life, his teaching, his preaching, to be models for how we are to live our lives. It's not an easy challenge, but it's one that's guaranteed to brighten and broaden our lives. I'm looking forward to sharing this sermon with you. Now let's worship together.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that loved and set me free. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Amazing grace, so vast and yet so free. The child of God, the Holy One, poured out his love for me. 'Twas grace that taught my heart to fear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear the hour I first believed. Amazing grace, so vast and yet so free. The child of God, the Holy One, poured out his love for me. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. Lead me home, lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we've no less days to sing God's praise than when we'd first begun. Amazing grace, so vast and yet so free. The child of God, the Holy One, poured out his love for me.
Have you ever had a conversation with someone that got heated? I mean, a real serious argument where your voice was raised and you were upset with them and they were upset with you, By the way, I asked this question at the beginning of my sermon at the 9 a.m. service under the tent, and there was this mournful voice from about a third of the way back that said, yes. I suspect every one of us in this room at one time or another has had one of those conversations where you're just frustrated with the other person and your voice is raising, your anxiety is going up, your anger is getting worse and worse. Maybe you're even getting close to being in a rage, just upset as could be when you looked at the other person and said, why don't you just grow up? Why don't you calm down? You just need to breathe. Or maybe you put all three of those together and just said, grow up, calm down, and breathe, would you please? Here's what I'd like to know. If that's ever happened to you, if you've ever done that to someone, have you ever experienced them looking at you and saying, oh, thank you for pointing out my immaturity. I'm going to plan now on growing up. I'm going to listen more carefully. I'll be calmer and I'll breathe more. If that's happened to you, don't tell me right now, but if that's happened to you, call me up next week. I will buy you lunch because I want to hear about this story. We'll go to McDonald's or Taco Bell or Wendy's or someplace, have a nice lunch over how that happened. I've never experienced that in my life. I've never seen anybody calm down when I told them to calm down. Nor have I've been on both sides of that conversation, have I calmed down when somebody said, oh, Glenn, just calm down. It doesn't seem to happen, does it? In those kinds of moments, our anxieties, our fear, our anger, our frustration rises and rises and rises, and we don't need someone saying to us, oh, why don't you please just calm down? It doesn't help. In fact, it feels like a put down. It feels like the person is speaking from up here down to where you and I are, caught up in our immaturity. And it feels like they're just putting us down, judging us, pushing us aside. In fact, oftentimes, I use the word of feeling there, because oftentimes our feelings are true in those moments, even if they don't match up with the facts. Even the facts are different. It doesn't change the fact that what we're feeling in the moment is true. I have this conversation regularly with couples in premarital conversations and counselings that we do here at First Community. We follow a program called Prepare Enrich. It examines your strengths as a couple and your areas of growth as a couple. It's a marvelous tool, and oftentimes, not all the time, but many times, there'll be a conversation come up between the two who are preparing to be married, and it can get a little bit heated, and there'll be conversation about you ignore my feelings. And I often say, be sure that you pay attention to the fact that feelings are true, even when the facts don't necessarily line up. I had a spiritual director years ago who said to me, Glenn, when you're feeling yourself getting frustrated, when you're getting angry and you're wanting to tell the other person, oh, just calm down. Instead, have that conversation internally, in silence, with yourself, and tell yourself in this moment, grow up, calm down, and breathe. You can't control what the other person will do or how they will respond, but you can, she said to me, control how you behave in the moment. If you will be calm, if you will breathe deeply, it may not transform the conversation at all, but you will have behaved in a way that is reflection of somewhat of a level of maturity. It's been very helpful advice in my life. I don't always follow it. I wish I did, but it's still a helpful piece of advice for me and for all of us, really. It's something like that the Apostle Paul is writing to the church in Ephesus. This congregation of Christians is just like us in many ways. Conflict will inevitably arise. There'll be a difference of opinion or a difference of idea, and the next thing you know, there's an argument and frustration can happen. And what the Apostle Paul does is not from a seat from up high, and look at me, I'm so well educated and I'm so brilliant on the Hebrew Scriptures and in touch with Jesus, I have this advice to give you. No. It's a voice of a compassionate pastor who's speaking to his congregation as an equal. And he wants them to understand that if you can speak the truth in love and grow up in Jesus, grow up in Christ, it will strengthen the community. It will strengthen your bond of faith. It's not a lecture from on high. It's an invitation to speak the truth in love and to grow up in Jesus. I saw a fascinating idea this week from a pastor who's reflecting on this text in Ephesians, she suggests that we go back to 1 Corinthians 13. Do you remember the love chapter in 1 Corinthians 13? Do you remember the context of it? Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not arrogant, boastful, or rude. Love believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. This love never ends. It's a beautiful text. What she suggests is take that teaching from Paul in 1 Corinthians 13 and apply it to what Paul is saying in Ephesians 4. By the way, I say Paul. There's a lot of arguments among scholars about who really wrote the letter to the Ephesians. Is it Paul or one of his students? Long, boring discussions and arguments. We're just going to call him Paul for the sake of clarity this morning. Paul suggests that we speak the truth in love. This pastor I read last week says, now take 1 Corinthians 13 and apply that. And here's what happens. Speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in kindness. Speak the truth with patience. Speak the truth without arrogance or boasting or rudeness. Do you see how that colors the conversation? It may be a difficult thing you have to talk about. It may be a challenge in your relationship with someone you deeply are in love with. It may be a challenge in your family. It may be an issue at work. It may be something at school. It could be a host of things, a variety of understandings. But if we can speak the truth in love, with patience, kindness, and without boasting or arrogance or being rude, think of how that reshapes the discussion and the conversation. I wonder, though, if we're really going to practice that in the church universal, or the church at least as it's manifest in the United States of America. Otis Moss III, the Reverend Dr. Otis Moss III, who preached here back in April, gave a beautiful lecture on the Saturday morning before he preached those two sermons, was wondering about this out loud as well. He's wondering what's happened to the Christians in our country who seem to have forgotten Jesus. He's wondering what's happened to these folks who sometimes get caught up in a spirit of rage, and that rage pushes them to lie and share damn lies and use insults and name calling as a way of getting what they want. And frankly, it works. You get more clicks, you get more likes, you might even get more votes with this sense of rage. And Dr. Moss is wondering, where's Jesus in this? How have we forgotten about Jesus? Why has Jesus been pushed aside? We say we follow Jesus. We say we're Christians, and yet Jesus is nowhere in our conversations whatsoever. Instead, we rely on lies and damn lies and insults and name calling. Where's Jesus? He wants to know. It's a good question. It's a valid concern. You see, because rage destroys, and the primary person it destroys is the person who's in a rage. You might win the argument. You might put the other in their place, or at least feel like you have. But rage, at the end of the day, destroys the person caught up in the rage. It's physically, spiritually, and emotionally dangerous. Dr. Moss gave a great illustration of how we can understand this. If you were there, how many of you remember that lecture? Were some of you at that lecture? Many of you were. It was a beautiful lecture. It was like an hour and 10 minutes long. He could have gone on for 3 hours as far as I was concerned. He illustrated his point like this. He talked about the rumble in the jungle. Remember the fight between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman way back in the 70s? I was in junior high. I remember watching it like it was yesterday. You can Google it and watch it on YouTube if you like. Muhammad Ali was a big, powerful man. George Foreman was a bigger, more powerful man. Muhammad Ali was a brilliant strategist when it came to the boxing ring. He knew he could not take a punch in the gut or against the head from George Foreman. One punch was all he needed. One clean punch is all Foreman would need, and Ali would be knocked down, maybe even knocked out. And so he developed a strategy. He taunted Foreman. He teased him. He made fun of his mother. I'm not recommending you do this. Let's be clear about that. But Ali in the ring got Foreman into a rage. The taunting, the teasing, the trash talking just got to Foreman's brain, got to his soul. And the next thing you know, you can see this if you watch the fight. He's throwing rights and lefts, and he's just out of control. He's just pounding on Ali. What's Ali doing? Do you remember? Show me with your hands. Yes, he's got his hands up here, he's got his guard up, and he's just, somebody said it, he's roping a dope. He's just taking the punch, absorbing blow after blow after blow until eventually Foreman is punched out. He's exhausted. And then Muhammad Ali, the brilliant tactician in the boxing ring, uses his boxing skills to win the fight. Rage destroys. Anger can be a tool. anger can be the impetus to push us toward solving an issue in our culture, in our world. If I see a wrong that needs to be made right and I'm angry about it, that anger can push me toward working to resolve that wrong. Anger is not the point. Anger eventually needs to be left behind. If I see an injustice happening over here and I'm angry about it, that anger can push me to bring about justice in that situation. Anger is not the end. Anger is simply a tool to push us toward doing what the world needs to bring rightness and justice to whatever the situation might be. The Apostle Paul understands this deeply. He understands that we, in the community of faith especially, are called to speak the truth in love, to grow up into Jesus, and to allow Jesus to become the one who guides us in what we say and do, not only what we say and do, but how we say and do it as well. What is important, how maybe even more so. And what this leads to is the idea that Paul essentially wants the church to grow spiritually. Paul wants the church to grow numerically. Paul wants to see the church become the church that it knows it can be. And then by implication, Jesus wants the same thing for us to grow spiritually, for us to grow numerically in our congregation, for the goodness of our experience of the love of Christ in this place, to allow that experience to spread out into the broader community, maybe even out into the world. The next thing I'm about to say is a very biased thing. I'm going to confess that right up front. I'm very biased in my opinion that I'm about to share. I believe our church is experiencing a season of kindness and gratitude. For months now, maybe for a year or longer, it feels to me, I use that word intentionally, it feels to me like there's a sense of kindness and gratitude that is permeating the congregation. Oh, let me be clear, for over 100 years, this has been a church that preached the love of God, the mercy of Christ, the forgiveness of all. Absolutely, yes. It just seems as though recently that's begun to take hold even more so, to be rooted deeply in our ministries, a sense of kindness and gratitude. And I've seen it taking place in our ministries. I mentioned Andy Blosser a while ago. Do you realize that on an average Sunday, just a random Sunday between the 1st of September and the end of May, we have a total of 70 musicians involved in leading our worship services. There's 8, 9, or 10 members of the Common Grace Band. There's another 25 or 30 who sing in the Cambridge Choir, led by Amy Blosser down at South. And then typically there's 35 or 40 voices even on a Sunday morning here. That's just a random Sunday. It's been marvelous to watch our worship and arts ministry grow under Andy's gracious and kind leadership. But more than the growth and the numbers is the spirit of grace and kindness that Andy brings to his work among us. It's a beautiful thing to see. Look at the Spiritual Life and Learning Center under the leadership of Seth Stearns. They too have seen in the last year or so their numbers grow and expand exponentially. There's a spirit of joy and enthusiasm in that ministry. Mary Kate Buchanan leads our pastoral care. She has at least 20, maybe it's more than 20 now, congregational care ministers, lay folks like you all who've been trained to provide congregational care. I heard a conversation 3 weeks ago with somebody with tears in her eyes saying to me, I can't believe I got a call after I got home from the hospital from one of your care ministers. It was the highlight of my month, knowing somebody cared enough to give me a call. It's been wonderful to watch the way Mary Kate's ministry has spread out in broad and new ways. Not just Mary Kate, but Camp Akita has had its most amazing season ever, according to Sarah Keats, who leads so well with strength and grace and kindness down at Camp Akita. I had a conversation with a woman 4 weeks ago now, who said to me, I'm Roman Catholic. We faithfully attend our Roman Catholic church, but we send our children to your Camp Akita because we love what happens to them during that week down there. That's a wonderful message about who we are. And then Reverend John Gerard has joined our staff recently. He's almost up to his four-month anniversary. Have you seen what's going on with missions and with justice? Oh, Amy Caskey led so well before John was hired in the interim as the director of missions. She's still in that position, maintained things very well. Thousands and thousands were fed and assisted and helped in the last few years. It's been wonderful to watch. Also Tim Van Sant, who established our justice ministries on our staff, still a member of our church. And now John has quietly and graciously moved into this position of leadership. I'm biased, but I have this deep sense that something is at work in this place. Nothing to do with left or right. It has to do with us opening our sails to the Spirit and allowing God to take us towards whatever God wants for us to experience next. Saw something like that in Ireland last week. And many of you know that 41 of us returned from that beautiful island as a part of the United Kingdom. It's an amazing place. Our trip there was delayed for 4 hours out of Columbus. It was delayed coming back. We couldn't land in Columbus on Friday night because there were storms that closed down the airport in Columbus here. And we ended up spending 3 lovely hours at a hotel in Pittsburgh. It was an amazing thing. I don't wish anything on you like that at all. But the trip in between was great, overwhelmingly wonderful. And one of the things we learned about was St. Patrick. I know there's a day honoring St. Patrick in March. It's a day when apparently it's okay for the entire world to drink green beer. There's so much more to the story, though. St. Patrick was kidnapped at age 16 in Ireland and forced into slavery. It was a horrific experience. What he had to go through and deal with was terrible, unbelievably harsh. And yet, according to the story, his mind stayed on Christ. That's a quote from the New Testament. His mind stayed on Christ. In that terrible situation, he didn't allow his mind to be taken away from him, his faith to be taken away from him, his love for humanity to be taken away from him. He came out of that experience of slavery, escaped it 4 years later with his faith strengthened. Escaped across the Irish Sea, went to Britain, studied the priesthood, studied the faith, became a great priest, pastor, and theologian, and returned years later to Ireland. And people experienced something new with him. They couldn't believe how open and welcoming and gracious he was, how his spirit just seemed to be full of love. And the next thing you know, there are monastic communities formed all over Ireland in the spirit of St. Patrick, monastic communities where the bishop was male and married. In some of these monastic communities, this is according to the U.S. Catholic, a periodical I read last week, in some of these monastic communities, the bishop was female. They became settings of inclusion and accepted, where all were welcomed in the spirit of Christ. A week ago today, our group met at a place called Tabarnolt. There's a holy well there. It's a lovely little spot. It's nothing like the Cliffs of Moher or the Ring of Kerry. Maybe some of you have visited those sites. But it's made beautiful not by the setting, but by the story. When Ireland came under British rule, when the Anglican Church was the Church of Britain, it became illegal in Ireland to worship as Roman Catholics. And yet there was a faithful community here at Tabarnolt, just outside of Sligo town, that worshiped in silence and in darkness. Sometimes on their way to worship, they would take off their shoes so the British soldiers wouldn't hear them walking through the woods to get to this secluded place where they could worship in freedom. You see, because the Spirit of God is not controlled by a party on the left or a party on the right. The Spirit of God is not controlled by somebody who has a gun in their hand. The Spirit of God goes where it will. And there in that place, despite their persecution, despite their illegality, they were able to worship in freedom and a spirit of love. What an amazing story. I've been wondering this week, since I learned that story, I've been wondering all week, what would happen to us? What would happen to our church? I mean, they were worshiping, even though it might mean they lose their livelihood. They might lose their lives, yet they took off their shoes and in faithful penitence wandered through the forest, making their way to a place where they could set up an altar made of stone and worship the God of love. What would happen to us if that same faithfulness took hold of our hearts and minds, took hold of our lives and our faith? What would happen to us if we could find our way to live this in this same way? You know, there's a verse earlier in the reading that Dave gave for us today that says that Jesus descended to the lower parts. There's lots of arguments about what that means. For me, it's quite clear. In my research, in my study, in my reflection on the text, it's quite clear. What Paul is saying is that when Jesus ascended into heaven, he also descended into hell. And the question for me is, are we willing to go with Jesus into hell? Jesus will go to any hell you find yourself experiencing. Jesus will descend in that very hell with you, not to judge you, not to condemn you, but to wrap his arms around you in the name of love. And basically, essentially, Jesus is inviting us then in that same moment. Are we willing to go with Jesus to that hellish place, wherever it might be? Are we willing to descend with Jesus in a culture that's overcome with rage, in a culture that's filled with lies and damn lies and insults and name-calling and worse? Are we willing to go with Jesus and to stay with him in the name of love, to speak out against the angry voices of rage in order to bring love into the reality of the world? When does that begin? When does that invitation start? When is that day? It's now. It's today. It's time to go in the name of love. Amen.
I sing because I'm happy.
I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me.
I sing because I'm happy.
I sing because I'm free. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me.
I sing, yes I sing.
Because I'm happy.
I sing, yes I sing.
Because I'm free. For his eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. I sing,
Yes I sing.
because I'm happy.
I sing, oh yes I sing.
Because I'm free. For his eye is on the sparrow,